The more you grow, the more you realize how important your roots are to maintain and to keep healthy so that you can branch out and grow in other parts of the world. I want to talk about truth today and how truth is a emotional language expressed through logic. This is something that I've learned only recently that I could express at least into words of some kind. Because everybody knows truth when they hear it, right? It's a kind of feeling that you get. There's always this kind of feeling that you get when you hear truth. And when you hear lies, sometimes, well, if you don't have discernment, you're not going to know. But if you have discernment, your mind may be a little bit foggy, or there might be a little bit of a kind of a crawling sensation along your spine or something like that. It's something doesn't feel right. Whereas with truth, you it's going to make you feel something. And usually it's one of two polar opposites. It's a love or a hate. And something that Nietzsche says in the first part of Beyond Good and Evil is, suppose truth is a woman. What then? Well, what exactly is he trying to say there? Because if truth is a woman and women are primarily like emotional creatures, there's a quote that Terence McKenna actually talks about as well. He says that, and he referenced somebody else, I don't know who it is, but he says, men are men, but man is a woman. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And that's really what wisdom is. Sophia, which is talked about in the Bible and which is talked about in a lot of different cultures nowadays, is, more so the expression of wisdom. And we think a lot about the goddess as a beauty, as a beautiful wisdom, or Mother Earth as this nurturing, loving, motherly wisdom in which wisdom itself is justified by all her works. And we speak about wisdom as if it's a her. And we often have this like kind of feminine mystical quality of intuition about us. And men have this too, don't get me wrong. Men absolutely have intuition, and I believe it could be just as strong, if not stronger, than some women's. But when we think about oracles, or when we think about these kinds of I don't want to say witches, because that's not the right term, but I want to say someone that is like a female sage, I guess you could say. These are women that have a deep connection to their physical body. And in my experience, women are far more connected to their physical body than men are. And it's not that men aren't connected to their physical body, because of course they are, but men in my experience that I've had, and I don't want to say that there's a difference between facts and or I will say that there's a difference between facts and experience. However, I'm not going to say that experience overrides facts, because experience does not override facts. Facts are facts. And I also want to talk about the connection between the emotional and the physical. Along my spiritual awakening and spiritual journey over the past 4.5 years or so now, it was like I was peeling back layers of my emotional body. And some people call this an energetic body, or some people call it, like I know Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body. And I think these are fairly metaphysical in terms, which is fine. I think it's a metaphysical term to describe something very intuitive. I also, though, want to talk more about the psychology behind it, because I think that's important to get the scientific understanding of what's really happening. For example, when I was going through a lot of my spiritual awakening and spiritual journeys, there would be times where I was elevating and ascending, or just working through some emotional trauma, where I would have these kinds of pains in my body or somewhere that didn't, like, there was no signs of physical pain. Like, there was no signs of physical alterations either. And some people even get like what they call the spiritual flu, right? And this is a part of the spiritual awakening process in which you start to have an increased compassion for yourself and this disillusion of the fear of death. And in that dissolution, you start to uncover emotional trauma that you had that revealed and that triggered this sense of death in the first place. Because fear of death creates the ego, but the removal of death dissolves it. And the ego is actually very important part of it's actually a very important part of your spiritual journey. To integrate the ego in a proper manner and an appropriate way, in which it's a mature ego, is actually very healthy, because you have a sense of self. You have a sense of who you are. You have a sense of what you've been through, what it's like to be who you are. So my right shoulder and my right jaw, often for on and off for about 1.5 years, had these times where I was going through integrating my masculine qualities, and my right shoulder would hurt or my right jaw would hurt. And I would have these visions in my meditations where I would use, some people call it Reiki healing, some people just call it transcendental meditation, amongst other things. I just kind of like to work through the emotion itself and think about the quality of it. But my right shoulder, for example, in one of these visions that I had, was my father, who, and it wasn't like my actual biological father, it was the spirit of the spiritual death father within me. It was like the shadow father who held a bag of money that was down in a well. And he looked up at me with this bag of money and this like bag of gold. He looked up at me, and my shoulder was really hurting because I could feel the weight of what he was carrying. But it was like he only had that money and he only had that gold. He didn't have a family. He didn't have anything else. He didn't have anything. And when I worked through this pain, it was like rediscovering and having it was a rediscovering of my own sins and my own wants of worldliness. I don't think it's a sin to have ambition, not at all. But there were times in my life where I was overly ambitious, but I didn't want to do the work to get it. I was afraid to do the work because it meant suffering to some degree. And it would be easier to just get a handout, right? That was years ago. And I wouldn't say I was ever really greedy, but I did want money. I had a certain kind of love for money because I saw that money, when people had money, their lives seemed way better. And now I've put myself intentionally in a position where I don't have complete access to anything and everything that I could want or that I could have for myself. I wouldn't necessarily call myself a minimalist, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself, or a materialist, but I wouldn't necessarily call myself a pure spiritualist either. I believe in a fine balance, and I believe that the things that you have as far as possessions are merely a reflection of your own inner spirituality. And how you express that is completely up to you. I mean, Socrates, for example, basically wore rags and never wrote anything down. But yet we still talk about him today, and we still know who he is and his words, which just is a testament to how powerful his spirit really was and is to this day. There were other times where my right jaw would hurt. And I actually thought that I would have to like go to the dentist. I thought I had a cavity or something. But then when I looked, there was no cavity, and there was nothing that looked painful in my mouth. And I was like, what is going on? And so I started to do some research, and I actually was practicing with Reiki healers and intuitive healers at the time, trying to just get more knowledge and information about what to do and how to heal and how to learn these tools to actually perform healing on myself eventually. And really the biggest obstacle in that was myself. I was stopping my own voice. And that's really what this right jaw pain was. It was this reluctance to speak from my point of view, because when I was growing up, there was a lot of trauma of when I spoke what was on my mind, there was often punishment for it, which I'm sure I'm not the only one, but in my case, it was fairly regular that I would be punished for speaking my mind. And I actually repressed speaking a lot of the time. And this is also a societal thing as well, where a lot of men today are just told they're told that if they do stand up for themselves, that it's toxic masculinity or something like that. And I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think, this is something I mentioned in a comment a while back. It's the toxic masculinity and toxic femininity doesn't exist. What exists is toxic individuals, and toxic individuals are just people that are broken in their spirit and that are void in their soul. You could say that they are soulless, whereas the ones that are at least having a soul left to save are soulful. And so these are just a couple examples of like physical pain connecting to spiritual pain. And I dealt with this in my meditations and such, and the healing. And there's different techniques that I've learned and that I've actually cultivated myself to get to this point. I've had visions of celestial like beings that are guiding me on how to heal myself now. I've gotten to that point to where I'm able to Well, I think anybody really is capable of doing this, to be honest. I think it's a skill, and it takes a kind of, well, it takes discipline, and it takes fortitude of mind, and it takes a stillness, a mental stillness, and a visualization and imagination technique that you can develop on your own. It's playing out a an imaginative scenario in which you work out your emotions through the imaginative scenario. So we're learning then, as we express truth, to communicate and understand how to communicate with compassion to ourselves. And as we extend that compassion to ourselves, we naturally extend that compassion to everybody around us. The beginnings of the spiritual awakening will really flip your head for a loop. I remember when I started to actually have these situations where I would feel these pains throughout my body, but I didn't understand what they were. Of course, any sane, quote unquote, person would think that they're going crazy. But there are often people like Charles Darwin, for example, that thought that he was going crazy, and he had these like years of mental episodes where it was a different frame of mind. And a lot of these moments that I had were directly related to and in communion with the situations of my life at the time. And I wasn't awake enough to see the patterns before me, but I'm now to the point to where I am completely understood. I completely understand the situation. I have complete understood. How do I say it? I have a complete understanding of the situation, and I can completely have a recognition of what somebody is trying to profess to me. It's like when you're playing chess and there's like a natural pattern of play, right? If you move your bishop here, the castle over here on their side can move certain moves to corner your knight or whatever, or your queen, and there's certain patterns that are to be played, but it's a very unique process in which there's like the pattern itself. There's almost no chess game that is ever the same. Almost every single chess game is going to be different, even though all of the pieces move with particular patterns. Think about life as a chess game between good and evil. And the game of chess itself is simply life. But the pieces of good and evil, they do have the same patterns, but their motives are completely different. And so when you can look at a situation and say, okay, I've understood this process before. I've seen this pattern play out before. I know where this is going. For example, with women recently, I've been approached by women at the gym now, which is very nice. I'm not complaining at all, but the I can see the patterns. It's like, I know the game that you're playing, sister. I know the game. You cannot fool me. I cannot be disillusioned. I've seen this game play out too many times before. for example, well, in this example, she asked me, "Oh, well, do you mind if I just hang out here a minute?" And she was wanting to go next to me on this pull-up bar, and just those words alone, I could see the pattern lay out before me. It's like I could see miles and miles and miles ahead in the future. If there was going to be anything to be had with this female. And this was like a week ago. And then she did something very similar yesterday. And asked me if somebody was using this machine next to me. And I said no. And then she stuck around a little bit again, didn't start using it. And so I looked at her and I said, "Are you going to start straight away?" And she was taken aback and she took a deep breath, because I could see that it was as if there was no sense of time in that week. I just remember everything. I don't know. It's just a gift, I suppose. I have always thought that people have this quality. Apparently they don't. And so I remember everything. And when I said that, I could see, like, in that moment, she remembered that first instance and everything leading up. And it's as if I could see her own future playing out before her. I could just feel it. And this is, again, a gift from God. This is not something that I'm not going to take. I will take responsibility for it because it's my gift, just as much as you have your own gifts. But it's almost like sometimes you don't want to know what you know. At least that's how I feel about some things sometimes. And in this situation, like, very, very attractive woman. And we chatted just a second longer, and I could just tell that, you know, never start something you don't finish, right? And a lot of women today, in my experience, just don't even want to start something. They just want to hang out. They just want to hang out there for a little bit and monkey branch to something else. And so me saying, like, no, I'm not going to initiate anything any further unless there's a reciprocation. And she half reciprocated, but I could tell that I could see this is like the path that we were going down in the future. If I were to actually do anything about it, it wouldn't mean so much in the end, because we would have never really even started to begin with. And so being able to communicate with emotion like that through logic helps you see things very clearly. Which leads me back to the very beginning of what this video was on, was just having the sense of connection with the truth, expressed emotionally but played out rationally. So I hope this video was useful and informative, and please like and subscribe or comment on the video. It helps with the algorithms, and that's the best way that you can support this channel at this time. I also have, like I've mentioned before, my own website, regalchange.com. And if you want to email me about any stories or any workshops that I have or any art that you'd be interested in, please shoot me an email at regalchange@gmail.com. Peace be with you till next time.